All right, thank you everyone for coming to our presentation today. The three speakers are going to be me, my name's Emily Moore, and my colleagues Jen Hoy and Matt Downs. We all got our PhDs together in biomedical engineering at Columbia University in New York City. We've all graduated a couple years ago and we've gone through different paths. Me, myself, stayed in academia, which means I'm still conducting research at a university. I'm studying basically how dental stem cells can be repurposed to make bone in other places in the body. And I'm doing that at the Harvard School of Dental Medicine. And I'll go ahead and let Jen introduce herself and then Matt.
Hi, so my background is in more of like medical devices, and after, that was what my PhD was in imaging devices. After that, I got into more life sciences and oncology, drugs, market research, and consulting. So through that, I've been very involved or familiar with, clinical trials and drug development and medical device pathways and for approval and the FDA.
And Matt?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Matthew Downs. Similar to Emily and Jen, I had my PhD in biomedical engineering at Columbia University. Before there, I was a material science engineer at the University of Florida. Currently, I am a senior scientist at the MITRE Corporation, and my roles there over the last 8-9 months have been closely tied with the COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition that has involved over 900 individual companies and universities within the public space. So this is non-government, trying to come together, work all pro bono to solve the pressing issues within the current pandemic that we have going on. So I've done a lot of work both within testing, within vaccine tracking, distribution, supply chains, as well as contact tracing. So I'll be discussing a few of these things with you later on this evening.
Thank you. So just one thing to note before we move on, the two little disclaimers we always have at the Zoom presentations. In no way, this is completely voluntary. We're just doing it for educational purposes. And these are our own thoughts and opinions, so they're not a reflection of our employers. So first of all, we have a lot of new faces for this Zoom, so I just wanted to very briefly go over why we're doing this. These informal Zoom sessions all started a few months ago when my lab got shut down for the pandemic, and in order to keep myself kind of busy, I started researching different topics surrounding the pandemic and then giving these informal Zoom presentations where people could just ask questions and I would either be able to answer them or look them up. And this kind of turned into me and a group of people forming a nonprofit that is going to be based in the Northeastern Ohio area. So this is all of the information. We're going to be posting these Zoom sessions that will be recorded from now on. And also, if you want to get more information on how to get involved in the community with the different initiatives regarding health education that we're going to be engaging in, here's some different places where you can do that. And you can also use these outlets as ways to contact us with any of your questions about COVID moving forward. So these were a list of questions that we solicited through the RACE Facebook page and social media. And so these are kind of the issues that we're going to tackle today. So I'll just go over them briefly. So Jen is going to tell you about the standard vaccine development process and how that looked in terms of the COVID-19 vaccine and if it actually was rushed, some of the claims in the media. I think a big concern is people are worried if this is pushed too quickly. And then I'm going to delve into the details of how the mRNA vaccine works and also traditional ones. Then we'll talk about how long your immunity from the vaccine will last, issues with side effects. Do you still need the vaccine if you have tested positive or developed the disease COVID-19? Also strains, because there's concerns about different strains in different countries and even different parts of the US. And then also we'll go over vaccine distribution. Some of this we're going to go over it pretty quickly, but remember this is going to be recorded, so you'll be able to review it again, and also we'll have time for questions at the end. So Jen, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Right. So the first question was, what's the standard vaccine development process? And, to be honest, it's pretty similar to a lot of the other drugs and treatments that, come out for other diseases like cancer or, even medical devices. But it's also different in that, extra care has to be taken because these vaccines are going to be given to perfectly healthy people, and you're trying to prevent disease rather than treat it. So the typical vaccine development process is, sequential, and it can take anywhere from like 10 to 50 years to complete. It starts off with, identifying vaccine candidates that can help elicit an immune response. Those candidates go into clinical trials in humans, and once that is proven to be effective, companies start to build factories and manufacture those vaccines. With all that information, we go to, through the approval process with the FDA, before distributing it to the broader public. Now, I'll go into each of these steps in more detail later, but just wanted to provide a brief overview of this process. And historically, there's been a wide range of the number of years it's taken to develop vaccines for different diseases. And it's due to various factors why the vaccine development process can take different number of years. And it's not really having to do with the legislature or the approval process or, the actual requirements for determining whether or not the vaccine is safe and effective. But other factors that do have an impact on whether or how long it takes to develop a vaccine for a disease include, the population it affects and, how much money and resources are put and dedicated towards developing a vaccine. Things inherent to the virus itself. For example, like how much the virus will mutate and how quickly it mutates, how complex its mechanism of action is. That can make the process of developing a vaccine more difficult or take longer or make it take less time. And so it's difficult to predict really how long it will take or should take to have a successful vaccine candidate. It might be important to note here too that, generally you start off with, thousands of different vaccine candidates in this discovery and preclinical stage. But, very few of these vaccines actually end up getting approved or working. So it's, you don't know when a vaccine candidate is going to fail or how many times it's going to trials it's going to take to find one that works. So just moving on to go into a little bit more depth in these. We first start off with trying to get a better understanding of how the virus works through academic and laboratory research. During this phase, they're really trying to figure out what antigens or proteins on the virus can be targeted based on how the virus works. Once they understand that, researchers can develop, different vaccine candidates to target those proteins or to, elicit a response using those proteins. Once we have a vaccine candidate, those vaccine candidates can enter preclinical studies. Those are laboratory and animal studies to test for safety and efficacy. Now they're really looking for, whether or not these vaccine candidates are safe, whether they elicit any side effects or adverse events in animals like rats or monkeys. They're also looking at efficacy, and they're looking at whether or not these vaccines can elicit an immune response in the animals. And because they're animals, we can actually do challenge studies where, if a mouse is given the vaccine and they can actually try to introduce the virus and see if the vaccine actually prevents that animal from contracting the virus and getting sick. Whereas, you know, in human studies, that's not really an ethical way of testing, but in animals, that is something that they can do. So at that stage, if that works out, companies can start to develop pilot factories and manufacturing of those vaccine candidates for trials, because all of these vaccine candidates must be approved for use in humans. So you have to show all of, you know, that data from the laboratory academic research, the animal research, and to show that, you know, that you can manufacture these vaccine candidates safely for use in humans. After that, once you've shown that and you have this investigational new drug application, next slide, please. These vaccine candidates will enter testing in clinical trials. So that is done in usually like 3 different phases of increasing number of participants in order to minimize the risk to these volunteers that are volunteering their bodies to for research. And so first phase is usually performed in fewer than 100 people. And in that phase, they're really looking for side effects and adverse events that may occur in humans that didn't show up in animals, because, you know, mice and monkeys will react differently to these vaccines and different drugs than humans. So they're introducing it to as few people as possible in order to ensure that these vaccines can be safely administered to humans. They're also looking for immunogenicity, which is, you know, just again the immune response to the vaccine. So it won't be helpful if it's safe, but it actually doesn't do anything either. So they're looking for a response to the vaccine. So as you go through the rest of the phases, phase 2 and 3, safety is always a concern. They're always looking for any side effects or adverse events that occur as you broaden the number of people that you're introducing the vaccine to. But they're also looking at efficacy and dosing now. So they're looking at whether or not the vaccine at different doses is providing enough of an effect and enough of a immune response to the vaccine. And so then once you get to a phase 3 trial, these are usually the largest trials. They are randomized double-blind trials normally. And what that means is that, you know, of everyone enrolled in the population, you know, half of the participants are given a placebo and half of the participants are given a vaccine. And double-blind means that neither the people analyzing the data nor the people administering the participants and the people administering the vaccine know whether they're given the placebo or the vaccine. And so what happens, because you can't do the challenge studies usually in humans, you wait for a certain number of individuals to naturally get the virus and get sick. And then after that, you do some fancy math and figure out, you know, how many of those people got the placebo versus how many of those people got the vaccine. And so all of this data, because it's, because we don't want a conflict of interest, but also because it's double-blinded, you have an independent review and evaluation of the data for safety and efficacy by what we call a data safety monitoring board. After these clinical trials are performed and this data safety monitoring board, you know, analyzes this data either, you know, at an interim, like a halfway point, or at the final data set, and deems like the vaccine candidate to be, you know, both safe and effective, the next step is usually to, you know, start building factories in manufacturing. So vaccines are usually made up of biologic material. So what that means is like proteins and cells versus other drugs like your aspirin or, you know, other things that are made out, can be like chemically synthesized and made into what we call small molecules. So it's a little more complex and requires some additional processing. And because of that, new specialized factories are required to produce each vaccine. And those factories need to have the ability usually to like purify these biologic materials. Because, you know, a lot of these vaccines aren't ever make it to the point of like succeeding phase 3 trials, they don't normally start to build these specialized expensive factories until they know that a candidate works. And once they know that and they build out, you know, the factories and all the manufacturing processes, because all of this information include like for the manufacturing, building factories, the clinical trials, all the way back to the discovery and how they identified like the antigens and all that. That goes into a biologics license application to the FDA. And so the FDA reviews all that data and either approves the vaccine or not, or they might do a conditional approval for, you know, requiring some more data or monitoring. After the FDA approves the vaccine, an advisory committee on immunological practices, which is a part of the CDC, provides a recommendation for the distribution and use of that vaccine. And so that includes things like immunization schedules, when kids should receive that vaccine, how often, whether that needs a booster, or things like prioritization of like what demographics, what groups of people should receive the vaccine first. After it's approved, you know, we can go on and move into the distribution and monitoring of the vaccine. So that just includes, you know, logistics for shipping and delivering these vaccines to the public. You know, it's usually distributed according to the policies and the prioritization of those who should be vaccinated, which is, you know, recommended by that advisory committee. And then one thing that is ongoing after, you know, a vaccine is approved and starts getting distributed is post-market monitoring for quality and safety and efficacy. So just making sure that the manufacturing of these vaccines remains of the utmost quality, and that there aren't any new safety signals or safety or side effects or adverse events that are popping up as it's getting used in a broader population. Phase 4 studies can also be done in some cases by the manufacturers or companies developing the drugs to see if they can make any more claims or use it in a more general population. So the next question was, you know, given all that, you know, how can we be developing the COVID-19 vaccine so quickly? And I think the biggest impact to how we've been able to complete a vaccine in a shortened timeline is that we are doing a lot of these steps that we just talked about in parallel instead of sequentially, which requires a lot more funding and a lot more resources to be able to fund, you know, building factories and manufacturing these vaccine candidates that, you know, are unproven, that they may not ever see the light of day because they don't work. So this parallel development, you know, especially with the manufacturing process, is, you know, helping to speed up the availability of these vaccines. The federal government, through the Operation Warp Speed, has devoted, you know, over $10 billion to building to the vaccine development, some of which and a lot of which has been used to build these factories and to purchase vaccines if they're proven to be safe and effective. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I'm actually going to add just a couple quick things there too, Jen. So I think in the discovery phase, you had mentioned that takes like sometimes 2 to 7 years for all of that in terms of the testing of like just the discovering the actual thing and then testing in animals. And I think one thing that's not commonly known is mRNA-based vaccines were already discovered and had a lot of that preclinical testing performed already. So we were kind of able to jump over that step. And then also in terms of the phase 1 through 3 trials, the volunteers were like showed up like crazy, something that people have never seen before. I personally applied to volunteer for a trial and they already filled up the participants so fast that I wasn't even able to get into the trial. So those are also 2 other factors in addition to what everything Jen mentioned that has enabled this process to speed up very quickly.
Yeah, and so, and just one thing to add to that on the mRNA, I think there's a lot of talk about how it's new or hasn't been tested, and really it's not that it's exactly new. It's just like you said, there's been a lot of work to develop it already. It just may not have been approved in widespread use in humans. Yeah,
right.
And so, in addition to doing these development phases in parallel, we can even shorten these timelines by leveraging prior knowledge of different coronaviruses and other platforms and vaccine platforms and technologies. So, we're lucky in that there has already been a lot of research in other coronaviruses like SARS and MERS in the past decade or two, and that the COVID-19 virus is actually very similar to SARS and MERS. And we had the viral genome sequenced and available for researchers in January. So we had actually a lot of existing knowledge and other work that had been completed on vaccine candidates for those coronaviruses, and that could be leveraged to create one for COVID-19. That made the whole discovery and preclinical phases much shorter and go much more quickly. One thing that is done with clinical trials to make that have a shorter timeline without compromising the scientific basis of it is by having more complex trial designs and doing it in a more adaptive way. So you start off with, one phase, and if that works out, or like one group of people, and if that works out, you move on and you kind of try to expand on that very quickly, rather than having a whole nother set trial where you have to start it up and stop it. So adaptive trial designs can help answer more questions with the same number of people. You have to get fancier with the statistics and math, but it is possible. And they also use larger and broader populations up front. So instead of having a few thousand people in phase 3, they've expanded it to up over 30,000 in the phase 3, which gives you more data more quickly and upfront on the safety and efficacy.
Hey, Jen, this is Jared. I also wanted to add that there is a bright side to the US's inability to get this pandemic under control, right? Which is the waiting time that you have in typical vaccine trials for sufficient exposure in the statistic. But this is happening for free. And there are also secret challenge trials that are happening among the wealthy. So that accelerates the entire part of the efficacy testing of the clinical trial.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. That's a great point. And so then, and then also in something that speeds up the manufacturing of these vaccine candidates is the potential use of these mRNA vaccines, which are faster to produce than traditional vaccines that need to be. They're just more complicated, and we'll get into more. I think we'll get into more detail on this. But just just note that, mRNA vaccine technologies are actually simpler and faster to produce than the more traditional ones that need to be cultured and purified. Then finally, we have the emergency use authorization approval process instead of or pathway that these vaccine candidates can be approved for use during the pandemic, which if we can go to the next slide.
Sure. I just on that too, I can't tell you how many different researchers I've talked to that have been waiting for FDA approval because it's literally just sitting on someone's desk waiting. Whereas because we're in a pandemic, they're literally waiting to sit down and review this as soon as possible. So I think your previous slide, you'd showed FDA approval 1 to 2 years. And a lot of that I think is just waiting for the FDA to get to it as well.
Fair. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, with the additional resources that, everyone, literally everyone is devoting to, this pandemic and trying to get vaccines and test kits, everything out there, is that, it's being prioritized. People aren't, sitting on their toes, and it's not sitting on the desk, not getting reviewed. It's getting reviewed immediately. Right. And, in addition to that, I've heard that, it's an interactive or iterative thing between these manufacturing companies where they're sending, the FDA non-complete, applications, but, the FDA is responding hey, this is missing. Just make sure you include that when you actually have your application. So there's no back and forth. Everything's up front, and there's a lot more collaboration between, the government and the private sectors.
Right. And even at the research level, I'd mentioned earlier that my lab was completely shut down at the beginning of the pandemic. Every lab that had anything to do with COVID-19 research was left to be completely open because they were considered essential. And I mean, people were donating all kinds of supplies and things to those labs so that they could literally get as much work done as possible. And those people were working around the clock. So I think sometimes when people are concerned about safety and seeing how quickly we did this, it's more of a test case in just what we could accomplish through science if it was prioritized and everyone was working together, more than it is a study in rushing something because it's not safe. And I think you did a really nice job with this graphic showing that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I wanted to address here is just, the process for approval, given all these things that we've done, doing things in parallel, kind of leveraging existing knowledge and all these, having more complex trial designs, all of this, how can we guarantee or say that this vaccine the vaccine that will be approved under EUA would be just as safe and effective? And the FDA is trying to be as transparent as possible with their process for how they're going to be evaluating any vaccine candidate. And, from what I've seen, they're trying to do this with the same scientific rigor and the same requirements that they would evaluate any of these vaccines. They want all the data to show that it's sufficiently safe and effective. And that all the benefits of this vaccine will outweigh the risks. And so the whole EUA process for approving COVID-19 vaccines in particular is actually a lot closer to the process for the full biologics license application that companies would normally have to go through. And part of that is also because, the potential reach of these vaccines is that it's going to be given to hundreds of millions of people. The risks are actually very high if something does go wrong. And so they have to set a very high bar in terms of its safety and efficacy to approve this. Both the BLA pathway and the EUA pathway for approving a COVID-19 vaccine, they both must show sufficient evidence demonstrating safety and efficacy. I just wanted to reiterate here that, even though we have these shorter timelines for the clinical trials, we have larger trials that do provide more data on the safety and efficacy. So that's one thing to consider there. one of the main differences, though, is that in a normal approval process, you'll have longer term safety and efficacy data, up to a median of, they'll be monitoring people who got the vaccine for up to a median of 2 years, or, 6 months to 2 years. But with our, current situation, they're requiring only a median of 2 months. So we have shorter term safety and efficacy data. So that means that we don't really have the best understanding of how long, these vaccines will have an effect in the durability of that protection that they might give. And the same with the side effects, right? So we're monitoring for side effects in that same time period. The one thing that is encouraging in terms of side effects is that, there's some evidence with other vaccines that are already out on the market that most side effects and adverse events occur within the first 3 months. So you are capturing the majority of, some of that safety profile data even with this shorter term safety and efficacy.
And I think part of my presentation, hopefully it'll become clear why you would see those adverse effects within the first 3 months.
Great, perfect. And the last difference very quickly is just that, in a lot of these trials, they do some secondary analysis. They just on subgroup populations, they aren't necessarily tied to primary outcomes or what you absolutely want to see in the trials, but they might be like subgroup analysis for different demographics and populations. And in our COVID trials, we are including volunteers that in a broader demographics and more general population to begin with. So hopefully be covering that with that.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. So we're going to move on now that everyone hopefully understands the process of how the vaccine is approved and like how our government, we go through the process of making sure that the research is rigorous and that it's safe and it will be effective. We're going to dig into a little bit of the biology, just enough so that you can understand how these vaccines actually work. So when we talk about the risk for side effects and weighing the benefits versus the risks, you'll have a better foundation of what we're talking about. So just a very quick overview. In general, our body's immune response, so when you get, vaccines are basically a way of tricking your body into thinking it's sick. So it has the immune response that is necessary to create a way to kill the virus and then also build immunity within your body. So we're tricking your body into doing that without actually making you super sick. So in the case of SARS-CoV-2, which is the actual virus, COVID-19 is the disease you get if the SARS-CoV-2 infection takes over your body enough that you start to develop symptoms and then can potentially get the COVID-19 disease from it. So in the general immune response that your body has, you get infected with the virus, and then your body essentially has a bunch of cells that will start an inflammation process. So that's when you start to develop symptoms, is because of the way that your cells are reacting. You're getting a runny nose, you're getting a cough, because your body's essentially trying to expel this virus and get rid of it. But you also have cells that are working together to destroy the virus and destroy the products coming from the virus. And eventually what you want is you want these things called memory cells. And the memory cells reside within your body over a long period of time, so that if you are introduced to the virus again, it will attack it very quickly. So essentially with the memory cells, you're avoiding this entire process again of your body having to identify that something foreign has entered your body and go through the whole process of destroying it. And so this graph over here just kind of shows this is when the virus enters your body versus when the cells start to attack it. So it's a little bit delayed. And then you're starting to generate these antibodies that you've probably heard about in the news with the antibody testing. And the antibody testing basically lets you know if you have been infected with the virus at any point in time. And so then you see that these memory cells start to develop, and hopefully those memory cells and maybe even some of the antibodies stay within you. So what Jen was kind of talking about is she alluded to this, and we'll get into it in a little bit, but the presence of these memory cells and these antibodies are essentially what give you immunity over a long period of time. And what's been difficult with this particular virus is we're not sure if people are actually developing enough antibodies or memory cells so that it can actually maintain immunity. So that's why you're seeing these rare cases where people are getting reinfected with the virus, because typically you can get something, you get sick from it, and then your body builds up an immune response and you're fine. But in this case, that's not happening. So that's why we need the vaccine to help that process along. So how does this particular virus work? Essentially, the virus will attach to other cells in your body. And so it does that with this spike protein. You've probably heard about this in the news. And essentially the spike protein just kind of helps it stick onto the cell, and then it will create a post-fusion. So when it's fusing with your cell, it will also create this spike protein. And then when it's attached there, that's when it releases RNA into your system. So this is important because this is where that mRNA concept is going to come into play when we talk about the mRNA-based vaccines. And then what happens is your body will actually reproduce the virus and any associated stuff that the virus makes. And so an individual person can react differently to a virus entering their body just because their cells are different. So some people's cells might just start attacking the virus right away. So that's how we get people who have been infected with SARS-CoV-2, but they don't display any symptoms. They do have the virus in their body though, and that's how they can transfer it to other people. But other people, just because their cells are different in their body, this virus might attach to their cells much easier, and it will reproduce very quickly in their body. And that's when they start to get a lot of virus, and that's ultimately what leads to developing COVID-19. So just this, basically, because people's bodies are different, that's kind of why you're getting a range of no symptoms at all to someone who might pass away from this virus. So let's go over just some very basic, what's DNA versus mRNA. I think most people are probably familiar with DNA just from movies. If you've seen Jurassic Park, hopefully you know what DNA is. But it's important to note that DNA has these what's called these double strands, and that basically makes it very robust and protected. And so what your body's natural response is it uses the information contained in the DNA to produce proteins and things that allow your cells to behave the way that they do. So what happens is this DNA kind of pulls apart, and you can get information called mRNA. So it's short for messenger RNA, and that's basically a single strand of the DNA. And this makes, I'm bringing this up because we're going to talk about storage concerns with the vaccines later, and it's important for you to understand that the information contained in the RNA is a little bit more vulnerable because it doesn't have that double strand. But from that information, then you produce proteins. So I think a lot of people like to use food analogies. And if you think of it as DNA is kind of like a menu when you're sitting at a restaurant, it gives you all the information that you can possibly need. And then when you put in, your waiter writes down your order, that's the mRNA, because you're getting that specific piece of information you need. And then when your meal comes out, that's the protein. So this is the process that your body does to give you the meal that your cells need in order for them to behave properly. So then those proteins interact with the cells in your body. So this is, that I mentioned earlier how the virus will release this RNA into your cells, and it produces a certain protein. That protein interacts with cells in your body, and your immune cells will either recognize it as being foreign immediately and trying to ruin it, or it'll take a little bit longer. And so based on how your body can respond to that, you either experience no symptoms, you develop mild COVID-19, or you can develop very severe COVID-19. And ultimately, if you recover from it, your body creates these antibodies and these memory cells, so your body's prepared to fight the virus next time. So this is just a general summary of that. I basically just left this on the slide deck. So when people do view it later during the recording, it's just a general summary of what I went over. And then for our scientists who want a little bit more information on like those, basically what I'm calling the memory cells, that's the T cells and the B cells, you can use this schematic. So now there's 3 different types of vaccines that we're going to cover anyway. If you're a virologist or work very deeply with vaccines, you know there's multiple other kinds, but the three for interest for today are what we're going to talk about: a vector, a protein subunit, or the new one, the mRNA. So a vector, and just to kind of give some context, I actually personally have worked with vectors a lot doing my own research, where we can essentially take DNA that we're interested in, you can put it in a vector, and then you can insert it into cells and make those cells produce the protein of interest that you're looking at. So a similar technology, they'll use that with a vaccine, where they take another living virus. So it's not it wouldn't be the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It would be another virus that has ability to reproduce very quickly, but will not harm you. And so that living virus, they basically insert the target virus DNA. So for this case, they would insert the DNA of that spike protein. And what that would do is it would be inserted into your body, and then your cells would go from the DNA to the mRNA to the protein stage. And essentially your body would produce a lot of this harmless protein so that your immune cells can practice killing it, and you restore these memory cells and these antibodies. So similarly, a protein subunit, instead of putting a whole virus into your body, it's just pieces of the virus that your immune system can produce the mRNA to the protein, or just the protein itself, and it'll flag it as foreign material and destroy it and go through that whole process of creating the memory cells. So examples of the vector, a lot of the common flu shots are with the vector process, also polio and rabies. And then the protein subunit, you have hepatitis B, HPV, and shingles. So mRNA basically skips the one step in the vector process, but adds an additional step to the protein subunit. And this is where you're just putting straight up mRNA that codes for this spike protein into the person's body. So we'll produce the protein, but it's harmless, and it gives our immune cells practice in getting rid of this. So the result of all three of these, essentially, what I've said a couple times, your immune cells destroy the virus or protein and hopefully create antibodies or memory cells. And all of them are ways to basically simulate you getting infected with the SARS-CoV-2 infection without actually getting sick. So if we go back to that previous graphic I showed, this is kind of where these different vaccines fall along that whole process. When you introduce the vector, you're starting at this stable DNA process. So it's going into your cells have to take the DNA, turn it to mRNA, then turn it into a protein, and then you go through that whole process of creating the memory cells. Whereas with the protein subunit, you're just straight up putting the fake protein in to mimic that spike protein and then going through it. So mRNA is kind of in the middle. So I think that's a big reason why, if you look at it in terms of the science breakdown, it's not super novel. It's not really that new. It's just a different way of doing it that we haven't done it before. And I think it's also important to note that as you go from this side to this side, I kind of made this to show there's heightened risk, effectiveness, and symptoms with something like a vector. But as you move along this process, all of those things are going to decrease, because it's more effective if you think of it in the way as your body's having more practice by having to go through this entire process. And it also, your body is going to have a little bit more of a severe reaction. So there's a much better chance that because your body reacted a little bit more severely, it's going to be motivated to make those memory cells and to make those antibodies. Because if your body handled it poorly enough, or you got sick enough, your body is like, I don't want to go through that again. I'm definitely going to make these cells and prevent it. But that also means you're probably going to get more symptoms. So what's happening is people are concerned that they're going to get sick from these vaccines. But really when I say getting sick, it means that you are going to have some sort of immune response, because you're essentially still getting the protein to trigger that inflammatory process. And so you're either going to experience no symptoms if your body is just made to handle it better, or you could develop cold-like symptoms. So you could get a fever, runny nose, maybe a little bit of a cough, because your body is still trying to get rid of something that it doesn't want in there. But effectively, when you do that, you're creating these memory cells and this antibody without getting COVID-19. So in that respect, the risks, the benefits outweigh the risks for sure. So then this brings us to, how long does the immunity last? And this is a very difficult question. Jen had mentioned, with certain, usually you track the individual for a very long period of time. And the reason why you do that is more for seeing if the immunity lasts, because we don't know how long those antibodies or those memory cells are going to stay in your system. So that's why certain vaccines, like, you have to get a booster or you have to go a certain number of shots before you actually develop full immunity, because your body has to get just sick enough that it is motivated to create those memory cells and those antibodies. And sometimes, either based on how intense the virus itself is, or the process of how you delivered it through the vaccine, you might need a couple shots in order for you to trick your body into creating those things. So there is a component of the virus's individual response, as well as how it's delivered, which I just covered, 3 of the different ways, but also people's individual response. Our cells are so different just because our genes are so different. So sometimes someone might not get any sort of symptoms, if they get infected with SARS-CoV-2 naturally, or if they get the vaccination. And also, I think it's a good example of why these researchers continue to monitor during the distribution phase, because we need to know, like, we can't just wait 5 more years and see if a pandemic hits again and then just give everyone the vaccine again. It would be better to know that ahead of time. It is important to note too that almost all the COVID-19 vaccinations do require multiple shots. And the reason why is because the mRNA-based vaccine is not as permanent as if you do like a DNA-based vaccine, but because SARS-CoV-2 is so dangerous, we don't want to go that route. The mRNA route is much safer. But it is important to note that when you get your vaccine, you are going to have to get multiple shots. And it's very, very important that you get the multiple shots, because if you don't get that second shot, you're not guaranteed immunity. And also, there have been actual recorded cases of people getting reinfected, but it is very rare. But it is important to note you have to get your second shot. And also, this is why just because you got sick doesn't mean you're immune already. You should be getting the vaccine even if you did get sick. So I'm just going to start on the side effects slide, and I think Matt's going to take over for the bottom section of it. But I did want to mention, this is something that I encounter in a lot of discussions with people, that a lot of the times the severe side effects you get from the vaccines don't actually come from the virus. And so this is to Jen's point earlier where she said, typically, within the first 3 months if it's been effective or if you're going to have some severe side effects. And one reason for that is because mRNA can be produced very quickly. So you'll either know if the mRNA, it has worked and you've established immunity, or if you're having a negative reaction to the mRNA almost right away. But typically people don't have issues with the actual mRNA. What they have issues with is what else is inside the vaccine. And so I think Matt put in here, it depends on where the vaccines are grown. In this case, Jen mentioned, you don't have to use cells or anything to grow this vaccine. You can just produce the mRNA. It's almost like a fake construct or like a fake piece of protein. You can just make that artificially in the lab. You don't have to grow it up in a cell first and then isolate it like we would have to do with a living virus or the DNA one. So that already makes it much safer. But also these vehicle, this is kind of a science term we use to describe, it's kind of like, you put people in a car and then the car drives the person where they need to go. We would put the mRNA in this solution, and that solution enables us to inject the mRNA into your body. And the vehicle is basically just what else is in that liquid solution that's getting injected into your body. And it contains adjuvants, which adjuvants are basically drugs that help boost your immune system's response. So they intentionally inflame your body a little bit more so that it has a little bit more severe reaction. And they put this in there so they can put a smaller amount of the virus or the mRNA in your body, but you still get a bigger inflammation response. but these will not hurt you. But sometimes people have reactions to antibiotics, and the antibiotics are put in there to prevent contamination during the manufacturing process, but also to help prevent bacteria from getting in there when it's injected into you. And also these stabilizers and preservatives. One example, I think there's an egg protein that's used in certain flu shots. And so if someone is allergic to eggs, they could have a very bad reaction. It has nothing to do with the mRNA or the vaccination of the virus. It has to do with just a piece of something else that was in the solution to preserve the mRNA from degrading. Because the mRNA, since it has that single strand, it's a lot more likely to be ruined or degraded in the solution. So that's also why you need to have the stabilizers and the preservatives. So then I'll go ahead and let Matt take it from here. And then I think he and I are going to kind of bounce back and forth for the rest of the presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Emily. Can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great, because I do not see any slides other than the one from slide 2 way back when. So I'm half going off my phone, half I think we should be. I'll let you know what I think we need in advance. So we discuss too many issues. But yeah, thank you. It's definitely a side effects. A lot of the things could that you hear like, oh, there's having like significant side effects or allergic reactions. That's a lot from the vehicles and ways that they reproduce these vaccines. There are massive chicken farms somewhere in the States held a secret due to supply chains for a lot of vaccines that we normally take every year. And a lot of the active vaccines are grown in eggs, and some people do have these negative reactions with it. This vaccine for the COVID-19 is not one of those. As Jen has stepped through and Emily reinforced of kind of how these mRNAs are working, it's basically taking things together and putting it, into more test tube and building it out from there. So you have significant less side effects. It has been reported in the news. That was the one way in front, and then they paused for a bit because it had some negative side effects. They had one patient with transverse melanitis, which is an inflammation of the neurons in your spinal cord. It is a negative side effect, but it was only in one patient. So again, while things are moving quicker with these vaccines, anytime they do have a significant adverse effect, they completely pause and stop and assess everyone else who is going through this vaccine trial right now to ensure that it's not happening in anyone other than this one person. There wasn't another negative feedback from their vaccine trial with someone else. It turned out, though, that they unfortunately were in the beginning stages of multiple sclerosis and not related to the vaccine whatsoever, so they were removed. So AstraZeneca, again, only had one person with a negative side effect, and then it moved on from there. No one else has shown any negative side effects. And again, they're the only one of the 3 major companies currently working on the vaccines. The other 2, Pfizer and Moderna, have not publicly released any negative side effects, which means that there's no significant side effects that need to be released. Thus, there are no significant effects to the human that is outside of any ad that you are watching on TV and hear them rattle off like you're in the middle of an auction. So again, there might be some things. You might have diarrhea. You might, have stiff joints for a few days. Your arm might feel a little bit sore at that. But even that, again, a lot of that usually is your sore arm is usually just from the dead virus that's kind of injected into your body eliciting that immune response. Again, with the mRNA, your body's going to be tracking it a bit differently to build up this inoculation. So again, there's no significant side effects that's been identified by the FDA through this distribution. I know a few people who are on multiples of these, and some of them are even in the vulnerable population that are in the higher category of A, they need to get it sooner, but B, also it needs to be proven safe in these people too. One of my friends, they've had surgery, had the gallbladder removed, so they're definitely immunocompromised in different ways, and it's showing that it is still safe in those areas. Can you go next slide, please, Emily?
I think this is actually me again, so I'll just go over it really quickly, and Matt, if you have anything to add, please chime in. So I think we already covered the length of immunity pretty well. One bigger issue is non-compliance and just like kind of a lack of education. So there's a lot of people that don't want to get the vaccine. And so this is kind of a big reason why we're doing a presentation like this, is to help people understand, what scientists are really seeing in the process. And like, I understand the science, and I'm going to get the vaccine as soon as I possibly can. And we just kind of want to kind of show you how we're feeling confident about it, and that you should also feel good about it as well. And also, I think a big issue, and Matt bolded this, is they're worried about people not showing up to get the second dose. This happens pretty commonly with a lot of vaccines. Like I know, especially when I was in college, a lot of women, we got the HPV vaccine. And I know so many people who just like didn't go for their third dose because sometimes they forget. I don't think that'll be the case this time, but the concern is that people will get those cold symptoms severe enough that they're going to be scared that they're getting sick from the vaccine, and they won't go to get their second dose. But it's very important for everyone here to understand that second dose is going to be critical for you getting the immunity. And you're also probably not going to get even close to as sick. If you did get sick from the first injection, you're probably not going to even get close to as sick for the second dose, because you're training your body to attack it faster. Also, there are different strains of the SARS-CoV-2, definitely in different countries. We don't know a ton of information about that right now, but that's something that Matt will talk about a little bit later. And then also these production and distribution delays. So Jen had mentioned a little bit, we already have factories being built to mass produce this, and also hospitals getting ready to be able to distribute it. So we're going to go over, Ohio has like a draft plan that they put together in October of who's going to get it when. So those issues where Jen was talking about, okay, they check and make sure it works, and then they start talking about distribution. Distribution has already been thought about way ahead of time. So that is also another reason why we're saving so much time. A bigger issue is that the hospitals are already getting pretty overwhelmed just by having to take care of patients. So now there's a little bit concern of, are they going to be able to administer the vaccines in addition to this burden of taking care of people at the same time? Also, the storage issues. I've gotten a lot of questions about, okay, well, we're hearing that this mRNA vaccine has to be stored a little bit differently, and that's true. The reason why I pointed out earlier that single strand of the mRNA versus the double strand of the DNA. I work with DNA and mRNA in my lab all the time, and you always have to store mRNA in the -80 freezer, because there's a lot of things that can get in there and break down that mRNA, because since it's a single strand, it's just a lot more vulnerable. Whereas you can stick DNA in like just a standard refrigerator for a very long time. Also, there could be an inconsistency in the rollout and the distribution between even our own states, because a lot of it has been left up to the individual states, and people have different ideologies on how to handle this pandemic, but also countries are going to handle it a little bit differently. And until you build up enough immunity, none of us are really going to be safe. And premature easing of safety guidelines is also a big concern, because I think a lot of people are going to think, hey, now that we have the vaccine, we're all going to be safe and we're all going to be fine. But the problem is, especially in between that first and second dose, you can still get infected with SARS-CoV-2 for real and actually get very sick. And there also might be someone texted me this question before the session. It's actually a very good question. She's a healthcare worker who's probably going to she's going to be one of the first people probably to get it, but her husband's not an essential employee or anything. So she's concerned, well, if I'm immune, but can I still be a carrier, and can I get my husband sick if he's not going to get the vaccine until later? And the answer is like, it is very possible. So even though people are going to start getting the vaccine, it doesn't mean we can start easing up on the safety guidelines. You should still be socially distancing, wearing your mask. And, we kind of have to work together in this until really everyone can get the vaccine. And there might also be some people who are immunocompromised and things who can't get the vaccine for certain reasons. But it's important as a potential carrier that you still are behaving safely even after you get the vaccine, until enough people have gotten it. Anything to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, I definitely want to echo that. Again, there are people who are always going to be immunocompromised or cannot take vaccines. You know, they are the ones who really benefit as us as a society working together to be vaccinated against this. They are the ones who need herd immunity. Not all of us are fortunate enough to be able to take these vaccines, and they're the ones who really need everyone else to, again, you know, abide by the NPIs, the non-pharmaceutical interventions, wearing masks, being socially distant, until there's a large enough population who have had the vaccine. I know Emily just shared a story about one of her friends who works in the hospital, and they're going to get the vaccine. Well, same as my wife. She works in the hospital. I've been working from home. I'm not going to be getting the vaccine, as I'm not in a low vulnerability group, which I'll get into briefly about distribution. So I'm lower on the totem pole of where this vaccine gets distributed, but I still could be at risk. So even if you have the first shot, definitely get the second one. And I'm going to briefly talk about some other things that can help you get into a good habit of finishing that second shot and other ways of combating COVID-19 as well. So next slide, please.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. I realized with the storage issues, I didn't actually explain. There's not as many freezers that operate at such a low temperature to store the mRNA. So that is another concern as to, are they going to be able to store the vaccine properly before administering it? If it were to be refrigerated, it'd be a lot easier, but we do have to have these proper freezers. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. And to that note, 2 out of the 3 vaccines, both the Pfizer and Moderna, they need definitely the lower temperature freezers. AstraZeneca does not need as cold a storage, and that might come into play with the supply and distribution of the vaccines as well. Looking at more urban areas that might have the capability, more either hospitals or pharmacies that could have these freezers installed or available for distributing the vaccine, they might be getting more the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, while more rural areas do not have this infrastructure but still need the vaccines. The AstraZeneca could be the route that those areas are taking. Right now, there's no distribution specifics of which areas get what vaccines. There was Operation Warp Speed, which was funded by the government, and certain pharmaceutical companies did take some funding from that. Pfizer was not one of those. So theoretically, they do not have to work with the government if they don't want to for the supply distribution, but from what I know, that they will be doing that. And so they will be participating in whatever distribution that the CDC outlines, and at the same point, CDC is giving some guidelines, but then it breaks down to individual states on who they see as the main people who need to have the vaccine first. Are you on the vaccine distribution slide?
I am on it. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Sure.
So again, the CDC is giving out, hey, this is kind of where the vaccines are going to be distributed. If you have a need, show that you can store it. Obviously, they're not going to be shipping out the places that are going to be storing this improperly. All vaccines are tracked with a paper tag, and people have to document that this is stored at the correct percentage. This is given to an individual, and it's recorded in that way. And so you're not going to be getting a vaccine that, that's really cool. Who's got freezers like that? They're making sure that this stuff is being distributed in a way that will be as potent as it was when it was first produced. So you'll be getting the actual vaccine that you need and stored in the climate that it needs to be preserved within. But once it gets to those states, individual states are going to have some jurisdictions about how they're going to be distributing it. Is it going to be first vulnerable populations, and then the healthcare providers and other critical workers and the general population? That's what some of the states have been showing as overall large aspects, is either phase 1, 2, and 3, phase 1 or 2. Emily's going to be talking about Ohio. It's got broken down into subcategories. They've really thought about this. I've got some links at the end, also looking at how Maryland, Minnesota, and California are going to be doing it. And that kind of falls in line again with Ohio and how they're looking to distribute it, and which one is vulnerable population, who needs it the most. People who are in extended care, living facilities, or those type of elderly patients who are more susceptible to this, need this first. anyone else who might be immunocompromised. If you're on, cancer treatments with having to go with chemotherapy, you're not going to have an immune system ready to fight this back. So there are already flags in your health records that say you're at a vulnerable population. You need to be getting this vaccine first to prevent you from having any serious side effects if you were to contract COVID. And then also within that phase one, a lot of times is these frontline workers. So it's the nurses, physicians, it's people who are working at the hospitals, in the healthcare facilities. But then it comes down to, where do states decide frontline workers? Are people who are frontline workers and then essential workers? Are people within service industries that still need to be doing their jobs, still need to be out there working in grocery stores and other areas? Again, while I might not think of them initially because they're not healthcare and like, oh, you're really exposed to all of the people who are positive, they're still out there and they could be potential carriers. And these are the people who a lot of us interact with. You're going to grocery stores, you're going to the baker, the butcher, somewhere else. They're going to be interacting with the most amount of people, and thus they could be the spreader. They could be more of the impetus of spreading the disease throughout the community. And so these essential workers could be considered within that area of need to get the vaccines for the general population. The general population, again, breaks down within the states, is that people are working from home. Could you go back to the office? Students, again, essential workers, definitely I would consider teachers in that category. Again, it is more states try to pushing to have schools be open, have students return to classrooms. Teachers definitely are going to be much more exposed to a wide population of people who cannot really socially distance, thinking especially in the elementary school age. Mm-hmm. Tell like a second grader, you need to wear the mask, stay away. That's not going to happen. So those are the people who need the vaccine the most in order to enable the rest of the community to continue on as normal, or as more normal as we have been over the last 9 months. So it might break down depending on the state, and definitely pay attention to how your state's going to be distributing this, and look to see where you can get this. Again, hospitals, probably going to be a good point, but also Walgreens, CVS, Duane Reade, other pharmacies are going to be looking to distribute this as well. And with that, there's going to be definitely tags of making sure that you get the actual virus and follow up with the second one. And I know the next slide, Emily's going to talk specifically about the distribution for Ohio.
Yeah, so I won't spend too much time on it because we are already like, we just have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. But this is publicly available, and I have the link available in our resources slide later. So I think Matt pretty much comprehensively covered all of this, but this is from the Ohio Department of Health. And just to emphasize, Jen talking about how people have been doing a lot of these steps early rather than linearly. They drafted this together, mid-October. So even though we might not even be getting the vaccine into Ohio until later this month, they were thinking about this way ahead of time. And so like Matt kind of echoed, you have healthcare workers and first responders, and it kind of goes down from there to everyone else residing in Ohio. So, if you want to look at this in more detail, the link is there, like the PDF is available online, and also you can just replay this recording as well when it becomes available. So back to Matt. This is just how everyone should get the vaccine in case.
Yeah, yes. Go and speed through this. Everyone should get it, period. Even if you test positive, severe symptoms, hospital, get the vaccine. The reason is there have been no long-term studies of looking at the inoculum, which is how many antibodies your body has made in reaction to being infected. So you think about things such as like the chicken pox that we're all aware of, probably either had it as a kid or got the chickenpox vaccine. But then later in life, even if you had both the vaccine and or chickenpox, you should still get the shingles vaccine. Well, it's all similar virus, but it's just, again, refreshing your immune system to know, oh, we know what this is, we should fight against this again, because it's been so many years. The difference with COVID-19 is there's been small case studies looking at people who've been slightly exposed and might not have severe symptoms. They might have some symptoms. You're like, oh yeah, I tested positive for COVID, very mild symptoms. We don't know if you actually have enough antibodies to fight off COVID-19 if you were to be exposed again, which comes into why some people, there's been reports of, oh, I've had COVID-19 twice. we don't know what the threshold is based on a large enough study right now to scientifically say what that is. So getting the vaccine will definitely empower you to have the maximum amount of antibodies that you need. Someone asked a question, I was chatting with them, in the chat window offline, but some of you may have heard of convalescent plasma as a way to treat COVID-19. And what convalescent plasma is, it's the plasma donated from people who have survived COVID-19, and they're spinning it down, getting the plasma, getting the antibodies from their blood, and injecting it into people who have COVID-19 as a way to therapeutically treat them. The initial studies said, it's not that good, it's kind of crap, we don't know. But then they said, wait, hold on, let's actually measure the titers or the amount of antibodies that's actually in that injection, in that plasma that they're giving them. And once they did that, they found out, okay, there's a certain amount of antibodies they need to have in order to fight off COVID-19 once you're positive. So with the vaccine, you're going to be already over that level. But what I'm trying to say is, if you've already been infected with COVID-19, you've tested positive from a nasal saliva test, you don't know what your level of antibodies in your system is. So it's better to just get the vaccine, because all that's going to do is boost it. You're not going to have any negative side effects having it. And again, like the shingles vaccine, when you already had chickenpox, it's that same thing. You're just going to get a boost. Your immune system is going to remember, oh, right, that's what we need to kill. Let's build up more of those cells in order to fight this off in the long term. So I very much encourage everyone to get the vaccine when it does come out, and it's allowed by whatever your state designates your group of, to whatever phase it is to get that vaccine. And next slide.
Yep.
Yeah, so the one thing, does it cover all COVID-19? No, it doesn't. Similar to the flu, right? Every year we all get a different, or most of us hopefully get the flu shot, and they all just take a gambit of like, oh, this is what the flu strains we think are going to get. COVID-19 could mutate, and this is also part of the reason why you should get the vaccine, and while the vaccine for this strain of COVID-19 needs to be developed and distributed as fast as possible. So even if the United States and all other major developed countries get this vaccine that all the major pharmaceutical companies are working on right now, get it out, if there's a pocket, if there's an area, if there's some countries that don't get it as fast as everyone else, and they have COVID-19 mutate in some form, we need to get a vaccine for that. Which is why you need to continue to take this, as I've always said, seriously. Even if you have the first shot, second shot, encourage people around you to get the shots until everyone is vaccinated, until this is really eliminated. There could be the chance that this mutates, and there could be the chance that this goes into a different version of COVID-19 that we don't know of right now. We do not have that. The vaccines will not protect you against that in similar ways that the flu vaccine only protects you against certain strains of that. It could mutate, it could change. This isn't the first COVID strain that we've seen. I mean, all the SARS and MERS, those are all COVID style pathogens. And this is just a different version of it. While the other ones were much more smaller and not as virulent as these, COVID-19 has definitely become a pandemic. So to continue to take this seriously, take the vaccine. The faster that the US can be vaccinated against this means that these companies can focus on other areas that are less developed or less able to have the supply chains or distribution routes for these vaccines, so that globally we're protected. So it's not just us and being like, oh, we're vaccinated, we can start traveling, fine, we don't have to worry about it. No. It's a big thing. We definitely need to go through that.
I think also too, getting the vaccine, just because the spike protein structures are very similar between different coronaviruses. If you get the vaccine and your body has that practice of developing the antibodies and the memory cells and fighting this particular virus, if the protein structure is similar enough with another coronavirus that also mutates, your body's going to be able to respond to that new protein spike much faster, because it's going to have at least some sort of template to go off of, and it's going to have some immunity at least build up, so it can attack it faster. So even if something does, new does come out, maybe we won't be perfectly immune against it, but we're going to get a lot less sick from it. And I think that's kind of like how our bodies handle the common cold or the common flu. Is that particular coronavirus, we've had enough practice getting over it, but we just didn't have any practice for this new mutation.
Yeah, and so to answer some questions about follow-up here, Carrie, the vaccine cause test positive on the vaccine alone. The test for being positive for COVID-19 is different than looking at what level of antibodies you have available to fight off. It's two different style of tests. So usually the nasal swab test is not going to be looking for that. You would need a blood test to be looking at that. So if you're positive on the nasal pharyngeal, what I like to call like the mummy test, you're going to get lobotomized and going to be put in a sarcophagus afterwards. They're not going to be picking up if you've got the vaccine. Those are totally two different tests. And what percentage of the population needs to be vaccinated is an effective solution? I mean, that's again, herd immunity and looking at your own individual communities. I think right now, again, because states are divvying it up so much, you know, really, I think 80% is probably the minimum that you're going to be wanting for an area to say, okay, yeah, we're not going to have as significant amounts. And again, looking at everything with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've all seen the huge spike curve and like low curve, and we're like, oh, we want to be in that low curve. And the difference between both of them is you still have the same area under the curve for all of it. It's just that which is taxing the healthcare at its maximum. When you run out of beds and when you run out of ventilators and we run out of personnel to treat these people in the hospital in an effective way at the maximum that they can save their lives or try to reduce them from having severe other outcomes, that's the level that's the small curve that you want to reach. When you're at the spike level, you're past that. You're so far gone. So at 80%, that still means that yes, there's going to be some people who are going to be probably infected if you don't have the vaccination, but it's not going to be taxing the healthcare community to a significant amount that they cannot treat those people. And we're significantly past that point right now of trying to enable just that care in the healthcare area that we can totally control this. So the vaccine will help bring that spike down to a much more manageable level until we reach that area of kind of herd immunity by using these vaccines. I mean, every year, 100% of people do not get the flu vaccine. Some people still get the flu, and then they become immune to it. In some years, the flu vaccine is completely off, right? You know, they may totally miss what those strains are for the year, but enough people get it, and we're all fine. We still go through it. So you're looking at still a significant amount of the population that needs to get it before we're going to be looking at that.
Just to add on to that really quickly before we move on. Just to kind of touch on, you mentioned the flu vaccine. The flu vaccine every year is kind of a guess. I think we've mentioned that a couple times. You just kind of have to predict what flu strains are going to come through that year. So with the SARS-CoV or the COVID-19 vaccine, you're developing a vaccine that is very specific for this exact thing. So that's also why you're seeing how this is like 95% effective, whereas the flu vaccine is typically 40% effective. It doesn't have anything to do with the mechanism of delivery. It's just, we know exactly what mRNA we need to put in this vaccine, whereas the flu, you're guessing. So that just kind of is the scientific basis for why there's a discrepancy between this being 95% effective and the flu vaccine being less effective. Matt, should I go to the next slide? Great.
Yep. So it should be showing tools to empower yourself against COVID-19. So there are a couple of things that can definitely help you both with the vaccine and also just in general while you're waiting to get the vaccine. One is if your state has a contact tracing app, which a lot of them do, definitely download it. So the contact tracing apps in a lot of forms is going to be a notification app. It's out for all mobile platforms. It's run through software both in Google, so Android and Apple phones. And what this is going to do is it's going to kind of it's going to track your location, but only in a way that says, okay, you've been around someone who has said, yep, nope, I tested positive, and it will tell you you should go get yourself tested. You've been around them for a long enough amount of time that you could also potentially become infected. The way that these apps are tracking your data, because then again, No one really wants the government totally tracking all your locations, even though, you know, we've all
They
got
already are.
Pokemon Go or other things on our phone that's going to be doing that. This is going to, the way that it is like two certification ways. If you have that set up for your email, being like, oh, I logged in with a different computer, texts you and verifies it. So it's kind of that way in which your information is completely de-identified, and all it is going to a different server to say, oh, yeah, no, this ID matches up with this ID. Send it back to them and say, like, you're around someone who's been infected. There's no other information. The max amount of information, which frustrates the heck out of public health officials right now, that's allowed with this is state level. So states can know how many notifications that their state have sent out in one day, but that's it. They don't even know the geographical level within counties. So by no means is anyone going to be knowing where you are exactly based off of this tracking data. It's purely for your interest to know you've been around someone who may be infected, and that's it. So again, especially if you're in a larger state, I mean, you know, no one is going to know where you are based off of that. There are other apps that could also help you if you are then, or help your community if you are infected with COVID-19. One of those is SerAlert. Some states are starting to adopt this, or other symptom tracking apps. And so what this is basically it's more of a manual contact tracing back in the day. So manual contact tracing was developed to try to track other types of infections, you know, such as AIDS, and say like, oh, who else may have you interacted with? So we need to track and let them know. So that is the spiritual successor to SerAlert, in which it is tracking your symptoms and saying, okay, this day you feel like this, and this day you feel like this, and this day. And so they know, hey, we really need to send someone out and make sure that you're okay, or make sure you're getting the medical attention that you need. And so this really helps you get the medical attention that you need when you have COVID-19. And it's also a way to have your local public health authorities know exactly who in their community they need to make sure has the treatment, and also aware that, like, hey, look, we need to start, you know, closing down restaurants or putting other NPIs in effect based off of that. In addition, there are some new apps that are being developed for vaccine tracking. As Emily and Jen have noted, that a lot of these vaccines, all the vaccines, you need 2 shots, right? And so if you get the Moderna first shot, you're going to want to get that one the second one. If you get AstraZeneca first, you want AstraZeneca second. If you're traveling, if not, we're all busy. We've got a lot going on. It's a stressful year. You might forget which one you have. There are going to be apps that are, some may be going live mid-December. Still working on some of those projects that I'm working with to try to get them out to the public, and so that you know which ones you've had. And they can also not only manually track it based on paper when CDC distributes to whoever you're getting it from, Walgreens and whatnot, but also you can track it. Say, hey, I've got my first shot, I got my second shot, and now if I want to go travel, oh, no one else in the States can come. You can show them this app and says, hey, look, I've got both my vaccines, I can travel, I'm good. This app is also looking to try to be adopted internationally as well. I know a lot of us have wanted to be traveling and cannot right now. And so this is, again, is trying to be adopted internationally as kind of a digital yellow card. Some of us remember that back in the day, passport, you have which vaccines you have in order to travel to other countries. It's trying to be a digital version of that. So look to adopt those apps as well, in ways to track what vaccine you've gotten, so you know that you get the first and second shot correct, and then be able to help out communities in other states when you travel to say, no, I actually have all my shots, I'm cool, I'm ready to go. So definitely be looking out for those.
Sorry, I think this SerAlert too is particularly excellent right now, because a lot of people might be getting turned away from hospitals because they're very, you know, at capacity. So if you are in a situation where you do have to go home, SerAlert could be a really good way for you to be able to make sure you're getting the care you need if you're having to deal with this at home, and also for your family to keep tabs on you. So that was really helpful. Thanks, Matt.
And SerAlert also, if you're a university student, SerAlert has partnered with ORU, which is a large organization of universities. So most major universities in the United States are paired with them. And I encourage you to use it on the campus, because again, campuses are locations with a high spread rate. this can definitely help enable both you and the university to better control any type of spread that's going on, treat you and your fellow students at that time, as well as the surrounding communities. It's not, you know, universities aren't a snow globe like I think they are, but there's a community all around you that you go out and shop and eat and do things. And so that'll definitely empower the surrounding community. You know, that's one thing that I definitely want to, you know, drive home to. It's while COVID-19 affects us as an individual, this is a community issue. And the more things that we can do to help the community, whether wearing masks or being NPIs, getting vaccinated, you know, using these apps to help our public health authority officials understand how to better serve maybe areas that aren't getting the best treatment because of either transportation or other issues. The faster that we come together and work against this, the faster that as a whole, our country will get over this pandemic.
Great, thank you. So just to close, I always end these Zoom presentations with a few takeaways for everyone to really think about. And because I know we always give a ton of information, but just to summarize again, please get the vaccine. They are very effective. We talked about, you know, why they could be very effective, especially compared to the flu vaccine. And this third bullet point, I really want to emphasize. I saw this specific language used in something on social media, and I think it's really important. And Jen did an amazing job kind of going through the development process. But it's important to note that this vaccine development process was not expedited because it was rushed. It was prioritized. And the three of us being in the research field, with all the horrible things that we've seen this year, it is really kind of incredible and a little bit bittersweet to see just how much we can accomplish with science and do it properly and safely when everyone literally can unite together to make it a priority. And then also I want to emphasize this again, this mRNA-based vaccine technology is not new. It's been around since 1989, so it's literally as old as me. And then emphasizing again, please practice social distancing, wearing masks and everything, and please take care of your healthcare workers. They're so stressed out right now. They're being very overwhelmed, and they're kind of just being left to fend for themselves. So please be kind to them, and you know, if you can do something nice, if your community is taking initiatives, please take advantage of that. And then also, please share this presentation to increase awareness and education. We did this you know, on our own time, and it really is because it's important for people to know these things. So just quickly, I'm going to show, these are the resources really quickly that we have listed here. Again, this is recorded and it's going to be posted. So if you want to access them, especially that Ohio Department of Health vaccine rollout draft, you can screenshot it later or find it on the website. And yeah, so there's more of those. And then I just want to emphasize too, if you have any questions or want us to cover more topics later on, there's a potential we'll repeat the testing one and then also maybe the numbers one that we've done a while ago based on some of the questions we got for this one. But you can always visit, even though we don't have anything in place right now because we're still building this nonprofit organization, we are doing a lot of online education and content for right now. So you can email us here with any questions. You can contact me personally with questions or requests. And then you can also message us on Instagram or Facebook. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. And if people want to hang around and ask more questions, we don't want to put you on the spot. So you can do this in a safe place. But thank you again for attending, and we look forward to the questions.